conservative, and that's exactly how they like it. It stands for the Association of
Just hit
Title
me up if
IX
you need help, but you got that big
that
brain
don't
energy,
let you
boss. I know
fail
you
in
got this.
school.
Plus,
This is
Mr.
not
Paper's got access to all
education,
my
and
shit.
it's not
If
an
I fuck
arm's
around with
length
GPS too
consultant.
much, you'll realize
Under
something's
the
up.
Biden
So if you solve this
administration,
stuff on your own,
IT
you can have a
has
cut of my
become
pay.
the unofficial enforcement wing of gender ideology in America's schools. They've replaced parental authority with institutional power and cloaked their activism in the procedural clause of Title IX. Now remember, AXA is not a government agency. It holds no elected authority.
Gotcha,
It
boss.
has
Give me
no
1 second, I'll
voter,
see what I can
no
do.
parent, certainly no child.
Okay, you seeing that?
But thanks to deeply embedded ties with the Department of Education, they've effectively become the authors and enforcers of gender policy for thousands of school districts. And what they're doing isn't education, it's indoctrination by stealth. Their training materials, which were exposed in July 2025 by a watchdog group, explicitly instruct school officials to use gender identity as a private, confidential matter, not between a student and their family, but between the student and the state. That means if a 12-year-old decides to change their name, their pronouns, or even their gender designation, ATICs have trained schools to implement it immediately and without notifying the parents. Not by request of the child's doctor, not by consent of the family, not by any court order, just by fiat. The directive is killing student clarity. Parents are being excluded, cut out of the process entirely. If a mother expresses concern that her daughter is suddenly being treated as a boy in school, the framework that fits and promotes doesn't guide schools to resolve that family conflict. It trains them to classify the mother's concern as a form of discrimination. The parent isn't seen as a guardian anymore. They are redefined as a potential threat. And that's not an exaggeration. That's the actual guidance being passed down to educators across the country.
Okay,
Why?
he
Because
sent
under
another
the
message, but it was
stringent
just a bunch of random
redefinition of
letters and a
civil
peach
rights,
emoji. Is
the
that a good
role
or
of the
bad thing?
parent has been
I don't know.
subordinated to the ideology of the institution. Ethics have called it inclusion, but it's nothing more than ideological colonization, dressed up in progressive language. It is a seizure of moral authority from families, and its transfer into the hands of unelected bureaucrats. This isn't happening in the shadows. The Biden administration didn't just allow this framework, they engineered the entire system. This Department of Education created a so-called Title IX Special Investigations Unit, a name that sounds like it belongs in a federal crime task force. And in a way, it is, except the crime they're hunting is parental resistance. This isn't about protecting students from harm. It's about protecting the government's ideological agenda from the only real obstacle in its path, mothers and fathers. Let me be clear, this is not an education policy. This is a cultural weapon. TICSA and the federal departments backing them are part of a much larger project to undermine traditional authority, sever generational ties, and replace the family with the state. That's what happens when the most sacred decisions about a child's identity are made by activists behind closed doors, while the people who love and miss that child run out with violence, if necessary, criminals. Think about what that means in real world terms. A fifth grade can be told by their teacher that they are gay before it's fastened into their file. The school can change the child's name in the classroom
You
and
found
alter
GJ
their
yet?
records,
There's no
and
way he's
even
walking
grant
far.
access to optional sex lives. The parents will know nothing. They'll receive no phone call, no consent form, no alert of any kind. If they find out of a threat, the school has been trained, frankly, to escalate the issue as if that parent is the problem. This is the machinery of totalitarianism, not in some far-off dictatorship, but in American public schools, funded by your tax dollars and signed off by your government. And here's where the corruption becomes systemic. The Department of Justice has not stepped in to stop this. They've stepped in to enforce it. The Department of Education hasn't pushed for transparency. It has built
Fucking
the
what?
enforcement infrastructure. The very federal government that
Thanks.
once protected parents' rights through due process and equal protection is now redefining parent as a hostile actor. We are
There's a
not watching a
boy.
policy debate. We are
Can we get
watching a
out of
slow,
here?
bureaucratic erasure of the American family. And it's not just immoral, it's unconstitutional. But this isn't just corruption, it's strategy. And the reason they do it is simple. The family is the
Before you
last
come at me,
institution
I didn't tell
standing
those guys
between the
about
state
you
and
or
total
Raph or
control
Epsilon's
of
dodgy
your
cash
child's
shit.
future.
I swear on my dead
Let's
mom's
realize
life.
long ago
I
that
just...
totalitarian
I told them where the money
throughout
was
history
to
has
stop them
eventually
from
destruction.
killing me.
Can't win over the parents, take the children.
Yep.
The roots of tradition are too deep, too strong, and too resistant to the ideological lies of today. Then the only path forward is to cut the next generation off from that root system entirely, sever them from their families, their history, their
Those
biology,
guys,
and their moral compass.
I think they went straight to the
Detach them
lockup.
from the sterile,
You gotta watch out.
artificial soil of state of truth. That's not paranoia. That's the playbook. And gender ideology has been forced into classrooms by unelected institutions like APIXA. This is golden agenda, really playbook. It begins with a vocabulary test, pronouns, identity, gender affirming policy. But that's just the surface layer. What they're really after is something much more foundational. They want to transform the child into the family, a culture, and a soul into a
Whoa,
politically
shit!
programmable unit.
Why don't you just
that
fuck me
reasons
up some
lies
more,
not
huh?
with tradition, not with nature, not with faith, or even common sense, but with the ever-shifting demands of the bureaucratic elite. The fastest way to do that is to erase humanity. Because a child tethered to a mother and father is grounded. A child connected to faith, biology, moral structure is resilient. But a child raised in emotional isolation, that child can be broken and rebuilt. This is why they redefine authority. In this new order, the state is the parent, the school is the priest, and gender is the new gospel. There is no room for disobedience, no space for conflict, no acknowledgement of the family's sacred jurisdiction over the upbringing of its own children. Their entire idea of parental rights, familial bonds, biological truth has been recast as dangerous, outdated, and discriminatory. That is the heart of their strategy, to replace truth with compliance and to replace parents with programming. The people pushing this ideology don't see children as individuals. They see them as inventory, as raw material to be processed by the machinery of the state, molded by activists, and delivered to adulthood as fully compliant citizens of the new progressive regime. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's an observable pattern repeated in every regime that sought total cultural control, from Maoist China to the Soviet Union, the most radical educational experiments in the West. The model is always the same. Detach the child from the family, and the state becomes the source of identity. And that's what gender ideology allows them to do. It severs the child from biology, rendering their body irrelevant. It severs the child from language, making words themselves a weapon. It severs the child from parental protection, casting fathers and mothers as threats. And then it binds that child to an
You ever
institution that
try going
promises
around
safety,
things?
only if they comply. It's not liberation, it's possession. Make no mistake. ATIXA is really the mass. The real engine behind this movement is a deeply entrenched political class that views children
Whoa,
as state
shit!
property.
Why don't you just
Administrators
fuck
and
me up
lawyers,
some more,
the
huh?
lawyers and civil rights officials, the consultants, the writers, the policy manuals, and the political operatives embedded inside the Department of Education.
Oh,
They are not responding to
almost
culture.
there.
They are actively shaping it from the top down. They do not trust families. They do not believe in natural boundaries. They do not even believe in communication. What they
Oh,
believe in is control. And
thank you.
control requires chaos. That's why they target children. Because children can't fight back. They're trusting, malleable, and
You seen
most
the lockup on your
importantly,
GPS? That's where
dependent
TJ
on the
stashed the
adults
cash.
around them. So
Remember,
what
those guys
happens
who
when
jumped
the
TJ
adults
could
in
be
the
there
child's
already.
life
Don't
are
let them get to you,
replaced by
too.
ideologues? What happens when schools become temples of confusion instead of institutions of knowledge? What
Man,
happens
the
when
amount of
the
money
only
TJ moves for
affirmation
Epsilon is
a
wild.
child
But
receives
hey, I
is the
guess those fancy
affirmation of
outfits
his
don't
or
pay
her
for
future
themselves, huh?
reality? The results speak for themselves.
Sorry, protein break.
Skyrocketing
Gotta get in
rates
the
of
grind, am I
depression,
right?
anxiety, self-harm, and identity confusion. And instead of pulling back, they double down. They don't ask what went wrong. They don't question the model. They simply dig deeper, silencing the parent, demonizing the skeptic, and punishing anyone who refuses to participate in the mass belief. And what is the left's end game in all of this? It's not compassion. It's not help. It's not
What the f?
equality. It's
Stop them! They've
dependence.
got the cash!
Because once you replace the family with the state, Once you replace truth with slogans, and once you replace biological identity with static labels, then you have created a generation incapable
Yeah,
of
don't let those
resistance.
fuckers bring you
You
down.
created citizens
Yes,
who don't
boss,
question the
yes.
rules because they don't even remember a world without them. This is how political abuse perpetuates itself, not through military coups or ballot stuffing, but through cultural capture. And it starts where the people are most vulnerable, inside the family and inside the minds of children. Because if you control the next generation's values, you don't need to worry about the old man's vote. That's why the feeling for Donald Trump has always been so visceral, because he didn't just speak out against his policy. He threatened to dismantle the entire pipeline. Trump was the first president in decades to publicly challenge the idea that bureaucrats could override
Forget
government.
about that stuff.
The language of moderation. He
You
exposed the
ready?
home
Epsilon,
business
sense.Let, collect
and
the
reversed
cash.
the
I'll be waiting at that
Obama-era
location.
guidance that
That's the
neighborhood
last
had.
one.
He pulled federal funding from schools to push radical curriculum and declared with clear, unapologetic terms that America's children belong to their families, not the government. And that scared me because it exposed the truth. This wasn't about rights. It was about real estate, ideological real estate. And Trump was threatening to eviction. That's why they created public enemy number one. Not because he offended the elite, not because of his rhetoric, but because he had the gall to tell the American people what was really happening behind the walls of their local schools, and then took steps to shut it down. And the only way to dismantle a rigged game is to flip the table. And that's exactly what's going on. You don't defeat an ideological machine by politely asking it to slow down. You don't reclaim your rights by asking permission from the very people who stole them. You confront it, you uproot it, and then you replace it with something grounded in truth. That's what must happen now. Not someday, not eventually, but immediately. Because the longer we wait, the deeper this machinery of deceit embeds itself into our schools, our laws, the very minds of our children. The first and most urgent step must be to abolish Biden's so-called Title IX Special Investigations Team, which is nothing more than a federal
A
surveillance
vision of
unit
professionalism.
tasked with
That's you,
hunting down
boss. Like,
dissent
you know,
and
we'll
punishing
say it
school
does
districts
professionalism.
that dare to prioritize parental authority over progressive dogma. It was never about enforcing the law. It was about intimidating institutions into compliance. It was about flooding every hallway with fear, turning teachers into informants, and transforming counselors into ideological gatekeepers. That entire apparatus must be dismantled completely and without apology. Next, we must strike at the heart of the shadow structure, the TIXA. This organization, masquerading as an objective training body, has become the de facto regulator of gender policy in American schools without ever receiving a single vote from the American people. They do not represent science. They do not represent parents. They represent the institutional left, and their influence must be eradicated. Under an America First administration, a TIXA would be stripped of all federal endorsement, banned from providing training materials to public schools, and exposed in public hearings for the ideological colonization they perpetrated under the guise of inclusion. But removal isn't enough. Restoration is essential. We must establish, in clear and irreversible terms, that no school may alter a child's name, pronouns, identity markers, or medical referrals without full written parental consent, not partial knowledge, not a vague phone call, full, informed, documented consent. This is not a gray area. This is the most basic line in a functioning civilization. Parents, not bureaucrats, decide what happens to their children. We also need a legislative firewall, federal protections that define and defend biological sex as the basis for school sports facilities, records, and privacy rights. Not because it's politically convenient, not because it's popular, but because it is biologically and morally correct. Every girl in America deserves to compete on a level playing field. Every boy has a right to know that his privacy won't be sacrificed to ideological confusion. This is not cruelty, it's clarity, and the American people are starving for it. But restoring order means more than just changing policy. It means investigating how this mess was allowed to metastasize in the first place. The DOJ must launch a full-scale federal probe into how radical nonprofits like the and its affiliates gained backdoor access to children through twisted
Go back to your
interpretations
hole,
of Title
shit
IX.
dick!
This is not simply educational policy. It's the weaponization of law against the family. And if these organizations broke that law, they must be held accountable, publicly, thoroughly, and without delay. And while that investigation proceeds, we cannot allow a single dime of taxpayer money to subsidize the continuation of this insanity.
Hi, what do you
That
need?
president must lead an executive
Yep,
order to
sure.
revoke federal funding from any school district that ties different transitions from parents. Let the message be clear. If you want government money, you must obey the government's law. And that law begins with the Constitution, not with the whims of unelected activists. But even that is not enough without a full restoration of the standards we once had before this ideological rot took hold. In 2020, President Trump issued Title IX guidance that made one principle absolutely clear. Sex means biological sex, not feeling, not self-declared identity, not bureaucratic mood swings, biology. And that guidance didn't just restore clarity, it protected parents. It ensured that no changes could be made to the child's records or treatment plan without notifying the family. That was the correct standard then. It remains the correct standard now. And it must be reinstated in full. But perhaps more important than any regulation, investigation, or funding restriction is this. We must reassert the family as the primary moral, emotional, and legal authority in a child's life. That authority does not come from Washington. It does not come from policy mandates. It comes from the natural order, an order older than the state, stronger than ideology, and more sacred than politics. A mother has a right to raise a child without being undermined by a school counselor trained by ATIXA. A father has a right to protect his son without being branded a bigot by a government employee who thinks biology is hate speech. These rights are not granted by the state, they are inalienable, and they must be defended as such. That is what America First means in this context. Not slogans, not sound bites, but a full-scale declaration that our children will not be ideological hostages in their own classroom. And the only political leader in modern American history who has shown both the will and the ability to take on this machine is Donald Trump. He doesn't ask for permission. He doesn't apologize for speaking the truth. And he doesn't treat the family as negotiable. He understands what's at stake. If you lose the children, you lose the future. And if you lose the future, the nation collapses from within. But here's the part they don't want you to know. People are already waking up. There comes a moment when every manipulated movement when the mask begins to slip, when even those who once gave the benefit of the doubt, who assumed good intentions, who wanted to believe the system still operates with good faith, finally see the truth for what it is. That moment is happening now. Across America, from the suburbs of Virginia to the ranchlands of Texas, in the halls of school boards, and the chambers of local courts, the people are rising, not as partisans, not as pundits, but as parents who have reached their threshold. And what's emerging is not a fringe backlash, it is a national reckoning. The data doesn't lie. In red states and purple districts alike, there's been a massive surge in school board revolts, with thousands of parents showing up to public meetings, not with talking points, but with documentation, with personal testimony, with the unshakable clarity that comes when someone tries to hide something from your child behind your back. School boards that once rubber-stamped and Pixar-style guidance are now being put seat by seat, election by election, as candidates running on simple platforms, truth, biology, and parental rights, win with landslides that defy every media narrative about what Americans supposedly want. And this uprising is not just cultural, it's legal. More than a dozen states have now passed ironclad parental rights laws, explicitly affirming that no school, teacher, counselor, or federal bureaucrat can alter a child's gender identity in secret without parental consent. These states are not just passing laws, they're daring the Biden administration to try and stop them. They are drawing a hard constitutional line between federal overreach and local sovereignty, and they're doing it with the support of people. This isn't rebellion, it's restoration. And that restoration is beginning to reach the courts, where constitutional principles still have weight, at least for now. Judges across the country have begun striking down school policies that hide gender transitions from parents, ruling that such policies violate the First and 14th Amendments. In Wisconsin and Florida and Missouri, and even in historically liberal regions, courts are finally recognizing what the left has tried so hard to obscure, that parental authority is not a cultural preference, it's a constitutional right, and when that right is denied, the harm is not theoretical. It's devastating, it's permanent, and it is being inflicted on minors who were never old enough to understand the ideological battlefield they were dragged on. And perhaps most importantly, this is not just a conservative backlash anymore. It is not limited to one party, one race, or one ideology. It is now common cause. Even liberal and moderate parents, many of whom voted for Biden, who supported same-sex marriage, who believed in tolerance, are beginning to understand that they've been deceived. They were told this was about inclusion, that this was about supporting vulnerable students, that this was about protecting kids from bullying. But now they have seen their own children return home confused, emotionally volatile, and in some cases permanently altered, because a counselor trained by a group like ATIXA decided they knew better than the parents who raised them. And when those same parents go to the school and ask what happened, they are met with walls of silence, policy doublespeak, or outright hostility. This isn't compassion, it's contempt. It's the contempt of institutions that no longer see themselves as serving families, but as replacing them. And the damage is mounting. Youth depression rates are climbing. Identity confusion is exploding. Social trust is evaporating. And still, the Biden administration doubles down. Still they fund these programs. Still they punish schools that dare to resist. To the left, this isn't failure, it's progress. They believe that chaos is fertile ground for control, that the more confused and detached the generation becomes, the easier it is to reshape them. But the American people are not stupid. They may be slow to anger, but they are not blind. They are no longer silent. Trump's vision of restoring parental authority, grounding policy in biological truth, and ejecting radical ideology from every federal program isn't just polling well, it's catching fire, and not just among the MAGA base. Increasingly, Hispanic parents, Black parents, and even first-generation immigrant families, many of whom fled countries where the state controlled children, are rallying to the side. They understand what this is. They've seen this movie before, and they know what comes next if no one stands up. Because this is not just a political issue. This is a moral and civilizational line in the sand. This is about whether the state has the right to override nature, override family, override faith, and override fact. And Donald Trump is the only major figure in public life today willing to say what millions of Americans know in their hearts, but have been afraid to voice out loud, that there is nothing compassionate about lying to children. There is nothing progressive about hiding truth from parents. And there is nothing democratic about institutions that treat your child's body like state property. This is not peace. This is not justice. This is not safety. This is surrender masquerading as progress. Because when the state hijacks your child's identity, your silence isn't peace, it's surrender. And Trump is the first man in a generation who refuses to yield. Because in this system, accountability is downward facing only. If you challenge the hierarchy from below, you're a threat. If you fail upward within it, you're promoted. That's what makes Trump and Musk intolerable. They operate outside the guild. They succeed without its approval, reject its language, and refuse its rituals. Worse, they're proof that the entire class isn't necessary. That the economy can grow, platforms can thrive, and the public can mobilize without the middleman. Because the ruling class can't punish them through insider mechanisms. It turns to external ones, indictments, censorship, fabricated scenarios. The goal isn't correction, it's elimination. But these attacks only reveal something deeper. The system isn't just corrupt, it's brittle. It survives not on performance, but on the illusion that it can't be questioned. Outside. It comes from the weight of its own contradictions. Systems don't collapse because they're hated. They collapse because they've made themselves too fragile to absorb pressure. The American institutional regime, spanning media, academia, corporate finance, and government, appears powerful. It controls language, enforces orthodoxy, punishes dissent, but its power is brittle. Because it has no redundancy, no tolerance for competition, and no internal correction mechanism.
You
Every
fuckhead!
feedback loop in the system points upward. Error isn't diagnosed, it's denied. Criticism isn't integrated, it's erased. The system doesn't learn, it suppresses. And suppression creates artificial stability until reality reaches the higher ground. That's exactly what happened in the Soviet Union. For decades, the regime appeared monolithic. It censored dissent, punished opposition, projected dominance, but underneath the surface, nothing worked. The economy decayed, the bureaucracy bloated, and the moment external information leaked through, via black market media, personal networks, or unsanctioned speech, the legitimacy collapsed almost overnight. East Germany was the same. The Berlin Wall didn't fall because the public was brave. It fell because the regime was exhausted, propped up by fear, disconnected from production, and unable to maintain the illusion once truth became visible. Our system is approaching that threshold. Dissent is escape contained. Trump's reemergence isn't a political comeback, it's a structural warning. The regime has thrown every mechanism at him: indictment, censorship, financial warfare, media excommunication, and he's still viable. That's not just about him, it's about what the system failed to prevent: a functioning alternative center of gravity. When a system decentralized can't neutralize disruption, it doesn't adapt, it destabilizes. Because the appearance of strength is masked deep internal decay, institutional rot, declining trust, intellectual uniformity, and ideological fragility. The system doesn't fear collapse because it's strong. It fears collapse because it knows it's already hollow, and once the illusion breaks, what follows is form. It's counter-revolution. The only question is whether the system breaks first or the people do. This was never about Trump. It was never about Musk. It was always about the system and the fact that it's breaking. A stable regime can tolerate dissent. A brittle one can't. And the current system, rooted in managed perception,
The Diamond
centralized
Casino and Resort
enforcement,
is your
and
discreet
institutional
hideaway
self-worship,
in the
is
center of Los
fundamentally brittle.
Santos.
Not because it's under attack, but because its internal logic has collapsed. You don't need to destroy a regime like this. You only need to stop believing in it. When that belief dies, enforcement becomes desperation. Rituals become mockery. Symbols lose meaning, and even minor resistance becomes explosive. That's what we're witnessing now. The reason figures like Trump and Musk provoke such disproportionate panic is because they expose something the ruling class can't afford the public to realize. The rules are already broken. The institutions no longer serve their stated purposes. The laws no longer constrain power. The language no longer describes reality. So the system compensates with noise, legal warfare, manufactured crisis, censorship disguised as safety. But these are symptoms, not strength. You don't indict a man 4 times because you're confident. You do it because he reveals your authority is performative. History doesn't treat systems built on fraud kindly. Whether it's the French directory, the late Soviet bureaucracy, or the technocratic elite of pre-collapsed Venezuela, the end comes the same way, not with fire, but with disbelief. Once legitimacy dies, everything else follows. That's why the fear isn't that Trump wins, it's that he exists, that he can stand outside the institutional structure and still matter, that a man without their credentials, their vocabulary, or their approval can't be erased. Because if that's possible, or if everything else they said was impossible, they don't fear Trump because he breaks the rules. They fear him because he proves the rules were already broken, and that the system built on enforcing them is next. This isn't a crossroads, it's aftermath. The collapse already happened. The institutions just haven't admitted it. What you're seeing now is cleanup theater, empty rituals, lawfare, manufactured consensus. But the scaffolding is hollow. Trump and Musk aren't anomalies. They're accelerants, symptoms of a structure that no longer commands obedience, only inertia. The counter-revolution isn't coming. It's underway, unannounced, decentralized, but past the point of negotiation. The regime's in jail, censored, redefined, but it can't rebuild trust. And without trust, it governs nothing. Power is fear doesn't last. It only delays direction. And the delay window is closed